Well, because that's my livelihood is now that, and it started with the fact that and I like being in so wilderness places and in forested areas, and we are in a landscape which has got forests and beautiful mountains. I mean, the highest mountains are right there at the back. So that's why it's very so that came I mean naturally. And eventually what happens is that that as you go along you realize that this will not carry on for long at this pace. So it's important to do something small if not big. Abs- Absolutely. I mean, that's how it should have been. If I'm making a livelihood out of skiing, I should have ensured that that area will always have snow, and it's conserved. The same thing with the forests or the rivers. So that's very, very important. Ironically, what happens is that the whole sustainability word sometimes does so disappear, and from ecology it becomes economy. And that's where you got to draw a line. It's not a very easy thing, you see. I mean, as a human being, everybody wants to grow and progress and sort of make, I think, more money. That's the way to if I were to put it in a very straightforward manner. And so that's where the problem lies, is that in many of these fragile so-called landscapes, there are too many of us who come up. Some have a sustainable little operation, whereas others will have a huge sort of resort or something like that. So that's where the problem is. So yes, you're right that it should have been that's how it should have been, that if my livelihood is dependent on the forest, I should have been very, very sort of responsible. But that's how it is. But we all know that, and water and fresh air and all that is so important to us humans. Everybody knows that, isn't it? But not. So that's the very irony of it, that not much is happening worldwide, I suppose. Yeah, and I mean that's where it gets very interesting, because if you look at, I think India's case study should have been a bit different. We had an entire culture here, entire civilization, which was based on the worship of nature, like any tribes anywhere. So we are really a very ancient tribe that has survived the onslaught till now. So if you see that, you will see that the entire philosophy, and which I'm not saying, I mean, it was religion. It was never meant to be religion. It was meant to be a very simple way of life, where the whole ethos was supposed to be based on the so-called sort of worship of everything from the Himalayas to tigers to elephants to owls, to Mother Earth, even the grass is offered as a, so to the biggest gods. So that should have been. That's why I'm saying that India's case study should have been different. But sadly, what has happened is that when you make it into a religion. I think that's the problem with, religion is that we worship these symbols, but we don't realize why we ever worship them. How did it get started? Why should we have sort of respect for elephants and tigers? They're supposed to be dangerous, or why should we have, and if you look at our rivers, if you look at we really sort of worship rivers, literally, but so that's how it is, so that's, so that is it's, I suppose, a problem everywhere. But as to take India's example, I feel very ashamed of. Sometimes, that we had all the sort of philosophy. We can't, we didn't go to, we were just here all the time. For 5,000 years we were here, and this very fertile land, this beautiful forest, and the mountains and the rivers gave us a lot. But I think why I'm saying I feel ashamed is that somehow we could not really save all that. Something that should have been our belief, our religion, our Bible was the forest, like that. So that's how. Oh, it's, I think, very, very sad. It's very, very sad. And if you look at, I would say, if you look at the rivers coming from pretty much the entire Himalayas, including sort of Nepal, since you mentioned you'll be going to Nepal, and you'll know what I mean, that at the rate of destruction of our rivers, it's quite mindless. Starting from dams and starting from, making roads into extreme wilderness areas. Unfortunately, on the other side, they say we've got China, which is advancing roads everywhere, security reasons, so national defense or what have you, so all that. So we're actually sadly, penetrating deep into the very source of what is supposed to be one of the largest deposits of fresh water, I suppose, in the world, And so that's a big, problem. And so that's the story up in the mountains. But as it flows down in the plains, our whole hunger for economy, and to grow. So that's fine. But what happens is when we don't put a sort of barrier, or if you don't have checks, so you will make a factory by a river, and the effluents will go down, and there's nobody to check. Even though there are fantastic laws, but there is implementation really suffers. So yeah, sadly I cannot say that that we are doing much about our beautiful rivers. Lack of enforcement completely, yeah. And we have a very active Supreme Court. We have a very active green sort of a wing of the Supreme Court, which is NGT, the National Green Tribunal, and they play a very proactive role in spite of big pressures from industries and political lobbies and all that, But so that's where it happens, So the laws are often not implemented. If you look at the Ganges project, where they pumped in billions of dollars, literally, endless, It's they could have made, I think, another river and made another mountain out of that. But still not. You don't see much of that on the ground. So somewhere I think, it's like a value chain. You can't just tell people, please, this is sacred and guard it, That's there. So that's one aspect of it. You got to have strict enforcements. We got to be strict sometimes, It has to be, solid fines need to be imposed, You should be jailed, for polluting something where the livelihood of thousands and millions is sort of dependent, on that. So that sort of enforcement lacks, and hence and you can go down to any of our, I think, rivers. The moment they're out of the mountains into the plains, they become pretty much like drains, And yes, we know about cases worldwide where the rivers have made a comeback. I often interact with people from say UK, and they talk about the Thames, how the Thames has had a sort of remarkable comeback, because it was quite similar situation with large number of people being on the banks and all that. So we know that it's not that it's ever too late, but it has to begin. It has begun, but we are largely, many people in the conservation thing and all that, we are frustrated that the pace should have been much faster. Sadly, it's slow, and it's not always very effective. Largely yes. I would say the conservation ones want to make a difference. It's not that they are or we are making a big difference yet, but yeah, that's how the spark begins from there. The spark begins from conservation people who are also people who have been interacting with sort of nature and wildlife. People who have been on a trek, people who have seen how glorious the mountains are, how absolutely out of the world those little streams or and the glacial rivers are in the Himalayas, and the wildlife rich areas, and yes, so they are obviously the ones who start this. And but then eventually it seems that we often have to seek the help of courts. In India, it stops there. The courts eventually you sort of go to them. They pass a law which has to be implemented. It's a case of for example our park. Wherein they had placed an eco-sensitive zone because unsustainable tourism structures were coming up in the periphery of the reserve, because unsensitive people were going into wildlife tourism because just for and purely on sort of fast gains commercially. There wasn't much of ecology there, So that's a problem. But then the Supreme Court a few years back, I think 2013, had put an eco-sensitive zone issue. So at least things have slowed down or stopped. The damage, that happened is there, but it's slowly being sort of dealt with. But at least then so I mean, it could have been worse if they hadn't put a stop to it.
Sure.
So that's how it really helps in India. To be honest, that's, I mean, I understand and a bit about that, but I'm sure it's something that, I mean, worldwide we are facing, isn't it? And we have seen glaciers in the Himalayas which have sort of receded miles. At the same time, if you look at the ice caps, they're big. I mean, when I speak with people who explore, the poles, and they say, if you thought the glaciers in the Himalayas is melting by a few kilometers, here we don't see it next year when we go. This entire huge ice cap. So yes, absolutely, we'll see that. See, the first impact will be, I suppose we are still not seeing, that impact, which where we were jolted out of our comfort zone. So we are seeing issues with wildlife, with and the oceans, I mean, rising and all that. But the real impact is I think yet to come.
Yeah.
Where we will be, it will hit us so hard that we will, So as I was telling you, I'm not too sure if the second, third generation is, I don't know what's going to happen to them. But yeah, it's happening at a very fast pace. The other problem that I see, at least, I mean, certainly talk in terms of for India. India, we always had a philosophy of, how could I put it, that you can only take from Earth, only that much, you see. And that's a philosophy which is now going away. It's become very consumerist, Imagine a landscape of over 1 billion, which becomes that. Imagine if we become like the West, Imagine the pressures will put on the resources, not just India, I mean, Earth's resources, and an economy so-called, which is also coming up faster. So I see that as a huge, threat. And it's, because I sit, under if I may put it that way, in a temple under a banyan tree with the gods which are elephants and tigers, So so it's quite that way. And I see how my ancestors lived. I see how less they took, you see. They took what the little field gave or something. They were dependent on the river, they did. So all that is very, all that has changed dramatically in 20 years, I suppose, and that's bad news for the world, because finally all the food we'll have to bring it from somewhere, all the fancy cars and all that will come, the big houses. You have heating, we got air conditioning, you see. so all that is going to come right from here somewhere, you see. So I see that as a huge problem, and as and global warming or climate change will just it will just make it even faster, sort of that deterioration, if I may put it that way. Well, if I were to put the positive things I've seen, I would say that there are much more people who are aware of things today. There are much more people who are going out there and doing it. When I was young, you would not, for example, you not see too many Indian bird watchers today. India Bird Club, which is a little organization based out of Delhi, has almost some 100,000 people as members. Which just shot up, which is going up like that. If you look at so that yes, awareness is there much more, and but then if I would say that, and my father or my father's father didn't have so much awareness, but they had a way of life which was then putting less some pressure, whereas my generation is definitely putting much more pressure. So I don't know really. Is that awareness really helping ultimately? And so, and the other thing I definitely see, at least in the forest of India that we have, yes, in terms of as a country, we probably are. There is probably no other country in the world as rich in biodiversity and in large mammals, iconic birds. We got most of the world's cat species, from small to tiger to so, I put it all here. We got, I think, bears. We got 30% of the world's bear species. I think the deer We have probably the most in the world, we have got lion, so we got pretty much all that. So our nature has been very kind to us. But what happens is because of the larger body population, those pockets of wilderness, unfortunately, are now small oases scattered all over. So I think when I was young, I used to see much more open areas, open space, scrub-like landscape. So all that has vanished quite rapidly. It has all been taken over by real estates and all that. Whereas if you ask me, has it affected the wildlife? I would actually say no. Most of the forest that I go to now has much more wildlife than it ever did. I think we have much. If you take tigers, elephants, the last at least a few years, and the visibility, including iconic species like snow leopards and red panda and all these things that you're not seeing earlier. Now you have started to see them. So in these isolated pockets, conservation has worked. Hence, this impact which you can see right there, is so it has made a comeback. So I think it's a direct fallout of that awareness of and people putting pressure onto our forests are not guarded by armed people, by the way. Our forests it does because they have to work very closely with the local population. So they're not like the Indian army, if I may put it, who are very well equipped, who are there to deal with the situation, all that. So but our forests have always been designed in a manner, I suppose, that they could deal with the local population. So they're pretty much an unarmed lot. They have absolutely ancient, weaponry and all that, because you don't really need that. So how you say wildlife is through intelligence network. How you would say, especially if you look at the proximity to India, to many of the areas where much of our wildlife is consumed is, I would say, is the word, literally speaking, it's right out there. So that way I think somewhere things have happened quite positive. That yes, many of the numbers of at least these very rare species are up. But that doesn't mean that that's good news, because eventually wildlife will not start living in skyscrapers. You cannot have, we already have reached an optimum of number of tigers we have. If you have walked around your camp, I'm sure at some point you have seen tiger pug marks, and that's the case everywhere. But a park can only, a 1,300 square kilometer reserve with these few thousand square kilometer of a forest can only have so many tigers. And if you look at a species like a tiger, which also, it also sort of breeds well, if the conditions are proper, they will very soon repopulate or I think overpopulate a forest. But then what happens? Once the numbers are up, you have to have much more space for them. They need more room. So the room is not there. So you would have, that's the thing, and we are seeing the fallout is quite evident and quite visible already, that the conflict is on the rise, is on the increase. And India dealt with human wildlife conflict. If you look at India's figures, it's absolutely mind-boggling. How many people are killed of wild animals? It's about 50,000 plus. 50,000 plus. Largely it's snakes. About 99% would be snakes. But then we also have close to 1,000 people for elephants. We have a few hundred people on tigers, bear and leopard and things like that take a huge toll. So that's the problem that will happen. What happened was that, people from my father's generation or their father's generation, there was something that India has was acceptability, They accepted. If the tiger killed you, okay, that's how it's meant to be. But now my generation or the urban generation is not like that. They will stick them, they will lynch them, they will deal with them the way anywhere in the world a dangerous animal would have been dealt with, And that's a problem I see, because I sometimes see, people lynched and a leopard somewhere close to Delhi. Well, I tell them, if you had a leopard in London or New York, that's what you would have done. You probably would have had fancy guns to take care of it, but that's how it would have been dealt with. We would have eliminated them, And that's something which was that sponge was always there, People accepted these things as a fate, as a karma, But that's now, I see that, going away. So I see that as a threat, because when the mindset of people changes, you know, that is not something that you'll get back, you know. So you might come into rural India or things looking very unruly, not really the so-called, they don't look very conservation-like, but their way of life, you know, just their psychology help wildlife, and that's the reason we have whatever we have, you know. So that's the thing. So that will be a huge loss to us, you know, because, and, you know, it's like trying to I mean, what is it, if I may say, you know, if you want to like re-sermon the Pope, you know, you know, that, well, they had it, they were doing it, you know, they were fine, but then, you know, now we got things which have come up so fast, urbanization has happened so rapidly, so-called modernization, you know, has happened so rapidly, you know, so that bridge is getting broader. So that I see that as a threat, yeah. See, I mean, like, you can, and a forest is a forest. The forest is born as a forest, and it will just die, it will not be another forest. It can be a plantation. You know, we can't make a forest, we must always keep that in mind. You know, you can plant trees, you know, but that doesn't make a forest. A forest has taken ages and ages, you know, thousands of years, from the mosses to the lichen to the creep, you know, those little things, you know, so that is what has, I think, sort of made the forest. So these, I mean, sanctuaries are just the last representation of that so-called old forest, you know. Hence, it's very important that, yeah, so they will host, and that's the reason why that bird, which is only seen in there, will only be seen there, because that's how it is, you know. It has taken those, it's like evolution has come into play there, you know. So hence they are absolutely important, you know. So we must have these last pockets of sort of wilderness, and if possible to expand them, you know. That's for, you know, sure, it's like, you know, there is no other option. I mean, we can't really shift tigers from one place and put them in a better environment somewhere, which will have water or deer or some for forest cover. No, it is not going to work like that, you know. You know, so I mean, we will have to conserve what was originally sort of what was there. Community-based, all this would really help, you know. You know, if you have, especially when you talk about angling and when you talk about, I think, rivers, so people will only be able, you know, people will only save. Sorry, do you want me to tell him to put the phone on? Is it
No,
this
that's
bother?
fine.
Okay.
It'll be fine.
So yeah, you know, so I think so it would have been, because I have seen this when people are, you know, when they are, you know, when they see, you know, if you go by a river, I think the biggest, I mean, sort of like a message goes by an angler. People, I mean, locals are quite shocked that, you know, that how this man came and he got this fish and he unhooked it. The conservation message is very far reaching, you know, and you know, so that's why, so they are at awe at this new practice. It's almost like you made a new religion, you know, and a positive religion. Religion is not always very nice, is it? So, and you know, so that's very good, you know, and yes, had it been this whole sport fishing and angling and all that, it should have been all over India's, I think, rivers, you know, and the local villagers should have been a part of this program, because how we are, that it would have been next to impossible for a so-called agency to save it, be it police or the forest department or anybody, you know. You can't just save a river, because, I mean, fish, unlike other things, were often eaten in India, you know. I mean, people would have not, maybe many people were sort of vegetarians and all that, so that was one problem solved, you know. But I think people who largely lived by the rivers you know, they did often take that animal protein from there. So that's why it was not often very easy. So, you know, so I mean, I suppose that, you know, so that's so that kind of thing, I think angling really, really helps, you know. So if it could be community based, if the local, I mean, so villagers were a part of the program, it would have been a win-win situation, you know. So then what happens is angling puts that soft, I mean, barrier for sort of mining, making unsustainable roads in the Himalayas, dams, you know. So that's, I mean, though it's small, but imagine if so many people had angling rights and they were getting something out of it when an angler coming, you know. They would have been the first barrier. They said, no, we will not allow this dam to come up, or we will not allow to do that. So it would have been a very powerful tool, perhaps the only tool. Otherwise, how do you make something out of a river? How do you make a livelihood out of a river? You can't raft everywhere, or you can't do that. But I mean, fish would have been there in pretty much most of our river systems, And if you look at many of our old records, you would see how, so they were always there. So yeah, I mean, it would have been the most ideal situation.
Yeah.
Well, sort of not. They're the gurus. A little bit sometimes.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think what took me to angling is the spots where angling takes you. I mean, I've been to many places in Northeast and up in the Himalayas. I think the good fish spot always takes you to this most amazing landscape. And that's my high.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, I have done a bit of angling. I mean, the thing like it's always. I think the first time I caught, which was probably in 97, 98 or something, or maybe a little earlier. So I realized this was only a wildlife I could hold now, because India's got very strict regulations in wildlife, and now you got to be it's a hands-off sort of all that. So it was a wonderful feel to understand, because fish, by the virtue of their looks, or just as a layperson, it has always been. It is just just fish. It's not that you have subspecies of fish or species of fish, So that's the thing. Yeah, it would have been the most wonderful tool, but when I look at how the government just looks the other way when it comes to angling, I think that's the bigger picture. Is that that somehow the rivers is now where that's where you can mine from. That's where you can extract raw material. So and I think the river has now sadly become a very commercial object. So that's why the government ignores these angling things, because somewhere at the end of it they will know. It's like, for example, I'll tell you, elephants. The elephant was supposed to be our national heritage animal, right? So after years of study by the Wildlife Institute, they said, we have a national animal, we have this, we have national bird, every state has a national this thing. They wanted to have the elephant as a part of it. The government never had it. They never took it as a, so the elephant, in spite of its huge, I think, religious sanctity and a long association with India, was not taken, because if you had that, you'd have to ensure huge patches of wilderness, you'd have to do away with a lot of railway tracks, you might have to do with hydroelectricity projects and the canals. So I think that's why sometimes I think that the government looks the other way, because if you had to do that, then you'd have to have rules to ensure that it is done safely, and those rules may not be they would not, I think, benefit the big guys, the World Bank and the what have you. Well, I think that's the thing. I think, so one thing is association. It's like till the time, it's your bear is as much mine as my tiger is yours. Let's be, that's how simple it is. There is no visa and all that out there, is it? So this is all our heritage. This is all we as a species, humans, need all this, you see. So I think it's very important that, we have to get together on this, We have to get together. It's almost like we have to make that one army which can really defeat the evil ones, which are all over, which are right in my backyard, which are right in your backyard, all over, because they have, all of us as humans have very short-term, I think, vision. Nobody is enlightened, nobody is educated enough, sadly, and, so I think till the time the ones who have been out there, who have understood why we need to conserve, the outdoors people, and the nature people, the anglers, even the hunters, I think one hunter is far better than those people who sit on an armchair and just sign, and that's the destruction of thousands and thousands of hectares or miles of rainforest or something, So, so all of them need to get together, and we need to make it as a very, I think, universal thing, because we know this today that, if we have a hole somewhere, we are all going to drown, for heaven's sake, It's not that if it goes wrong in India, then Canada is safe, or if Canada goes wrong, Australia is safe. We'll all get affected eventually, and it's a reality, And I think all outdoors people understand that. So I think it's very important that at least these nature people get together through various means of technology and all that, and somehow really speak loudly about it, and just target the fact that, that it's our next generation, it's the children, So if you're a father, I mean, it's bad news. I mean, I'm sorry, it's like that, So I mean, I'm a father of, and so I know. So I kind of want to tell them that they're very young, and it's very sad when I tell them that, listen, never have children. I mean, it's just that I've got this urgency to tell them maybe the world is no longer going to be, even though it's so beautiful, and yeah. So that's the thing. So I think everybody needs to get together on this. And
Yeah.